Did you know that you can feel the groove? That the beat in the music is so irresistible that it's almost impossible not to move, even if just a finger or a foot that starts tapping. And that moving to sound and rhythm, moving to a beat, is so empowering, so healing, so transformative. Because your nervous system is hardwired this way. Actually, as a human being, you are quite extraordinary in nature because of your deep relationship with rhythm. Often we only think of this as, just pleasurable, enjoyment, entertainment. But what if feeling the groove is not just pleasurable? We can all feel that. But what if it's much deeper than that? And even neuroscience seems to show that feeling the groove, moving to the beat, is one of the most natural and perhaps even one of the most powerful doorways into healing and altered states of consciousness that human beings have ever known. Welcome to the Trance Movement podcast, where we will be exploring altered states of consciousness through somatic healing practices, embodied spirituality, and what all of that means for your personal path and life. Hi there, my name is Arnoud. And I know, as most of you must do too, that there is something almost impossible to resist about rhythm. As soon as a strong beat comes on, and before you even think about it, something in your body starts to respond. Maybe a foot starts tapping, or your head starts nodding, or a finger begins to move. Now, I've been exploring this as a path for healing and transformation, realizing quite early on that there are, in essence, you might say, two distinct spiritual paths. Most people associate spirituality with things like silence and discipline, stillness and meditation, and withdrawal. So throughout history, many spiritual traditions, they followed what you could call the ascetic path. Things like fasting, contemplation, renunciation, and detachment from sensory experience. But there is another path, an ecstatic path, and one that we have actually been practicing for thousands of years. Humans have danced and drummed and chanted, and they have marched and swayed and moved rhythmically. And these kind of practices, they were not just forms of entertainment, they were technologies of consciousness. And perhaps the reason why they are so powerful is because rhythm does not only enter through your ears, it enters through your body. Now, in this podcast, I want to sort of skip over or maybe go fast forward through some of the more obvious and well-known ways in which sound and rhythm affect the human body. Of course, you can really feel the rhythm, the beat in your body. And one of the key principles behind rhythm and trance is something that they call entrainment. Entrainment is the process through which different systems begin synchronizing with each other. So at the neurological level, the electrical activity of the brain begins synchronizing with external rhythmic signals like the music, the beat. The brain literally locks onto rhythm. And this is why we can often continue feeling the beat even when it temporarily disappears from the music. But entrainment happens on multiple levels. Our breathing may gradually synchronize with the music, and even our heart rates may change. Groups of people dancing together begin to move in shared timing, and musicians playing together enter forms of collective flow. Now, if you've made it so far into this podcast, this is where it starts becoming really, really interesting. You know, many people in spiritual circles, in healing circles, in sound healing circles, for example, they talk a lot about how everything is frequency and how we all are affected by the frequencies in the sound in our bodies. But what I think is the most interesting, fascinating discovery about how we perceive rhythm from neuroscience, and I think this actually sheds a lot of light on how we experience the groove, the beat, is that when we listen to rhythm, not only do the auditory regions of the brain become active, as you would expect, of course, but areas involved in movement and motor planning also light up. The premotor cortex, the supplementary motor area, the cerebellum, the basal ganglia. In other words, the brain prepares movement while it's listening to rhythm, even when the body is still. And this explains something that we all recognize intuitively. We do not merely hear rhythm, we feel compelled to participate in it. Groove is not just simply an auditory experience, it's an auditory motor experience. The brain treats rhythm as something to move with. And this is why even people who, for example, say that they are not dancers or that they don't like to dance, even they often still find themselves subtly moving to music, even if the finger just taps a little bit unconsciously or their shoulders sway a little bit. The impulse comes first, before even the mind has even decided anything. And perhaps this reveals something important about human beings. We are rhythmic creatures. Music and rhythm are deeply connected to our experience of time, just as the planning of our movements involve things like timing. And we humans, we seem to be uniquely aware of time passing. We remember the past, we anticipate the future, we imagine possibilities, and we predict outcomes. And this ability gives us enormous creative power, but it also means we often become trapped in memory, in anxiety, anticipation. Rhythm does something remarkable. It organizes time. Music unfolds through patterns and repetition and loops and cycles. The beat creates a form of predictability, and so we begin to anticipate what comes next. This is what we do when we dance. You know, to allow your foot to land on the floor exactly on the right moment in the beat actually involves a lot of very complicated motor planning by your brain, but most people seem to be able to do this quite naturally. To perceive the beat is to predict the beat. In this way, music may even reflect something ancient in human evolution. Human beings are a walking species, and for millennia we crossed landscapes, step by step, journeying through time and space. Rhythm may echo those ancient patterns of movement. Music moves us because rhythm and movement were always connected for us. A beat is not static, it carries us somewhere. And perhaps that is why rhythmic music so naturally creates this sense of a journey, of momentum and transformation. And as soon as repetition, rhythm, synchronization start to deepen, something else begins to happen. The analytical mind softens, self-consciousness relaxes, and different forms of intelligence begin to emerge. You know, many people imagine trance as something exotic, something mysterious, something rare. But perhaps trance is much more ordinary than we actually think. If you have ever become completely absorbed in music, lost track of time while you're dancing, or perhaps you felt how you entered a deep state of flow while you were playing an instrument, or perhaps you have felt yourself disappear in the music, in the beat, then you already know something about trance. Maybe groove and trance are different terms to describe something similar. Especially in rhythmic movement practices, something very interesting starts to happen after this sustained repetition. At first, you are just doing the movement, but after some time, for many people this is around 20 minutes or so on average, the experience begins to shift. The movement starts feeling less controlled, less self-conscious, you could say less performative. It's almost as if the body starts to take over, and the narrative of the self starts to quiet down. The commentary softens, and then you start to feel that you are no longer moving, but that you are being moved. And this is not dissociation. This is not about escaping the body. In fact, it's just the opposite. The body becomes more present, more coherent, more intelligent. And so the rhythm reorganizes us. And this power that the groove has over us is very visible all around us in society and culture. When musicians or drummers, percussionists or DJs truly enter the groove, something similar seems to happen. Now, I'm also a percussionist, and I can tell you from my experience that playing a drum in many ways feels very much like dancing. Of course, the repetition, but also the timing of the movements. In many ancient cultures, rhythm makers used to occupy deeply important social and spiritual roles. And in our modern culture, perhaps DJs and musicians still carry fragments of this function. Not because they are special identities, but because rhythm itself has the power to guide consciousness. A DJ, a drummer, can shape collective states through timing, sound and repetition, tension and release, and groove. And in that sense, rhythm becomes relational. It connects people. It synchronizes nervous systems. It even creates empathy. It builds collective coherence. And this is one of the reasons why music can feel so healing. But this is a point where I feel that I need to make another important distinction. Because not all ecstatic experiences are necessarily healing. Our modern culture already contains many forms of ecstatic experiences. Parties and clubs and festivals and raves and ecstatic dance events. All kinds of intense stimulation and collective emotional release. And these experiences can certainly create this temporary liberation, some pleasure, catharsis, and emotional release even. But there's a difference between ecstasy as an escapism and ecstasy as integration. I think that there's a big difference, and the difference lies mostly in things like intention, but also embodiment and grounding and awareness. Because you see, without grounding, ecstatic experiences will just become another form of avoidance, right? Nowadays we call this spiritual bypassing. Another topic that's in and of itself really worthwhile to explore in another podcast. Because without awareness, altered states will just become another form of dissociation. And, without integration, just intensity alone will not necessarily heal. And this, I think, is also one of the limitations of certain purely transcendental or disembodied spiritual approaches. Some forms of meditation seek transcendence by withdrawing from the body, withdrawing from sensation, and withdrawing from the world. But there is another possibility. You might say, embodied transcendence. A form of transcendence that doesn't seek to leave the body, but that works through the body. I've seen this many, many times when the setup is right, as we teach in our facilitator trainings. As soon as people start to really move on the beat, and when the struggle starts to shift towards surrender, it becomes possible to enter these altered states while at the same time remaining deeply grounded. And this creates what I would call integrated transcendence, a state in which body and mind become aligned, where conscious and subconscious processes begin communicating, when individual and collective experience start to intertwine, and when spiritual experience become deeply embodied rather than abstract. Rhythm becomes a bridge between the physical and the transcendent, or between grounding and expansion, and between structure and surrender. This is probably why I think rhythmic practices have existed in almost every spiritual and healing tradition all over the world. Rhythm regulates, rhythm synchronizes, and rhythm organizes consciousness. And perhaps most importantly, rhythm allows surrender without losing embodiment. And maybe this is one of the most beautiful things about the groove. It's accessibility. And I've noticed this in decades of working with thousands of people, that entering altered states through movement is so accessible. You don't need years of training to do it. You don't need any spiritual beliefs. You don't need complicated techniques to learn. Your body already understands rhythm. And so then the question becomes not, am I capable of entering these states? But can I learn to enter these states consciously, embodied, and in a way that brings healing and integration and real transformation? And I can tell you, when you start exploring this path and allow the rhythm to truly take hold, something really special starts to happen. You stop just listening to the rhythm of life, and you come into alignment by participating in it.